Hello, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. Whether it be the infamous Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack last summer or an ongoing number of water treatment facility hacks, there is no doubt that infrastructure facilities have become a favorite target of cyber criminals. In fact, according to a recent report from Skybox Security, the first half of 2021 saw a 46% year-over-year increase in new OT vulnerabilities within organizations charged with running and maintaining key portions of the U.S. infrastructure. Joining us today to help break down some of the social and market factors driving these troubling cybersecurity dynamics is Alastair Williams. He's the Director of Solutions Engineering at Skybox Security. Alastair, thanks so much for joining us today. Jumping right into things, your report showed just an increasing number of OT vulnerabilities with a lot of U.S. infrastructure entities. What's with these guys? Why are they having such a tough time really continuing to upgrade and have the right cybersecurity tools in place that they so desperately need right now?
That's right, Jeff. Our Skybox Security 2021 research found that 83% of critical infrastructure organizations suffered breaches in a 36-month period. The research also uncovered that organizations underestimate the risk of cyber attack, with 73% of CIOs and CISOs highly confident that their organizations will not suffer an OT breach in the next year. These two data points really contradict one another, perhaps showing an overconfidence in their existing security capabilities and their willingness to accept that more investment in security needs to be made.
So really, they're not making the investments because they think they're good the way it is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Despite the criticality of these facilities, the security measures in place on OT products are often weak or non-existent. If you look at how we kind of got here, most OT assets were really not meant to connect to anything in the first place. And instead, they were often air-gapped, meaning that they were physically isolated from non-secure networks. And really, there was no provision to update or upgrade them on an ongoing basis.
So in a similar dynamic, but also a little bit different, you mentioned a lot of the different equipment that was never meant to be connected in this manner. The industrial sector is also a huge target right now for a lot of bad actors in the cybersecurity space. Is it a similar dynamic there in terms of these organizations not having the right cybersecurity tools in place?
Absolutely. And I think if you look at the backdrop here, critical infrastructure is not only a lucrative target for bad actors, but it's also a prime target for nations state-sponsored cyber attacks. We've seen a number of examples over the last, number of months with, major gas pipelines, multiple government agencies, a US city's water supply, multiple hospitals, and the world's largest meat-producing plants, all seeing evidence of a surge in OT attacks.
So, Alastair, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about Skybox Securities and the work that you guys do, maybe some of the folks that you've worked with in the past.
So Skybox Security is focused on providing proactive security posture management, which means that we're preventing security breaches before they ever happen. We delivered the most advanced exposure analysis, risk scoring, automation, and vulnerability management capabilities in the cybersecurity industry. And we do this for our customer base comprising predominantly of Fortune 500, Global 500, as well as government agencies. So, often we find that organizations have invested in, centralized network configuration management technologies. Perhaps they've made investments in patch management solutions. Maybe they've made investments in, traditional network vulnerability scanning. But often those data sources tend to be siloed from one another. And actually, when you start having a conversation with, the technical teams, the solutions architects, the security architects, the cloud architects, the people responsible for OT security, we can really demonstrate that we help them bring that information together in such a way that they can make much better informed decisions, but importantly, be able to, take action. We're talking about organizations that only have finite resources. There's absolutely a skills shortage in the security industry. And a solution like ours helps organizations focus on, the real key risks within their organization, but then provide a series of different remediation options and countermeasures.
So, Alastair, jumping back into some of the current issues that the industrial and infrastructure industries are dealing with right now, Log4J hit really hard in December. It kind of had everybody freaking out. It seems like that has calmed down a little bit. They've gotten a hold of some of the gaps and some of the issues that were being created. But what could you tell us now in terms of what you saw, in terms of what was happening, what has been done to sort of control the issue, and do you have any advice for those watching who may have experienced the Log4j issue and what they can do moving forward?
For a widespread vulnerability such as Log4j, patching all of the vulnerability instances is just hugely time consuming. Yeah. And not only is it time consuming, it's hugely costly as well. But, along with that, history shows that, the patch everything strategy is just a monumental waste of effort, since typically it's really a very small subset of devices that are actually exposed to the attack itself. So, what Skybox is really seeing is, yes, you need to identify those devices that need to be patched immediately because they are, directly exposed to one or more threat actors, or perhaps they are on a second step of an attack chain. Okay. But, it's then about understanding where you have other occurrences of that vulnerability that you can look to put in place, a midterm plan of how you would go about addressing that as part of a more BAU type patching strategy. The other thing, sorry, go on.
No, continue, please.
I was just going to say, so the other thing would be, really focusing on other remediation options as well, which I sort of mentioned before more generally. There are mitigation options that can be applied to, the vulnerable library, through configuration changes. Obviously, there are other mitigations in the form of things like intrusion prevention. We talked a little bit earlier about, network segmentation. So it's really about identifying which remediation options are best suited to the different occurrences of that vulnerability within the organization. When the vulnerability was first announced, it was very challenging for, organizations to understand where those vulnerable applications were. Many organizations have kind of deployed traditional network vulnerability scanning from the perspective of wanting to scan each asset once per month on kind of a rolling schedule, right? If they've got 30,000 machines, they will plan to scan 1,000 of them per day. So at the end of the cycle, they repeat the process, right? So they will have consequently deployed the associated number of scanners in the right places. When something like Log4j happens, the business, the senior management want to understand in a matter of minutes where and how big this problem is. And it's impractical to go from scanning 1,000 devices a day to then suddenly scan 30,000 devices overnight. So I think that's where also alternative discovery mechanisms need to come into play with things like passive vulnerability scanning. And the other thing I would say as well that we've seen is a lot of the traditional network vulnerability scanners are looking for the existence of that particular library of a particular version. But one of the things that we know, and actually we've seen organizations or vendors do, is to provide mitigation by way of a configuration change, right? So the version of the vulnerable library remains the same, but it's not exploitable in the same way because of this configuration change. And what we've seen is the network vulnerability scanners can't take that mitigation into account. So when you scan your infrastructure, it's coming back and saying, hey, you've still got 10, 20, 50 occurrences of that vulnerability. But the reality is that you probably address one or more of those through configuration mitigations.
Wow. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this continues to develop and evolve, and the solutions that those infected will have to come up with and deal with. Looking at another sort of ongoing problem situation when it comes to cybersecurity, especially in the U.S. manufacturing sector, is ransomware. We've seen a number of different instances. You brought up the meat packager, the meat producer. We've seen it with Colonial Pipeline, a bunch of other folks too. What's your take when it comes to ransomware? Do you pay them? Do you not pay them? What's your take there?
Wow, that's a great question. Probably the $64,000 question.
Yeah.
I think my perspective is, take on board the government and industry guidance, right? Federal agencies, including the FBI, largely discourage organizations from paying ransoms. It doesn't guarantee the retrieval of the data. It further funds and encourages ransomware groups from continuing their attacks. Similarly, cybersecurity professionals have seen, paying ransoms is just not the best approach. It gives the adversaries, more monetary incentives to continue doing what it is that they're doing. I think the best thing is, be as prepared as you can, right? Invest in the tool sets that, give you some of that raw underlying data.
Absolutely. So again, looking forward here, we've talked about Log4J, we're talking about ransomware. Overall, as we're early here in 2022, looking out for the rest of the year, what do you see will continue to be some of the bigger trends when it comes to cybersecurity?
So I think ransomware will continue to skyrocket as digital transformation expands the attack surface. Critical infrastructure will continue to be sort of in the crosshairs. We're seeing new vulnerabilities, many more new vulnerabilities than we have in previous teams. Our research team tells me, and I was speaking with them the other day, we see ransomware everywhere, increasing in severity. Cyber attacks have evolved from only encrypting kind of an individual workstation or system down to, large chunks of the network, but also exfiltrating data as well. So now it's not just a case of let's encrypt the data and want the ransom. It's let's encrypt the data, make the ransom demand, but at the same time we're gonna steal a whole bunch of your data and use that for other purposes as well, right? So it's a double whammy in that regard. For example, our February 2021 research revealed that there was 106% year-over-year increase in ransomware from 2019 to 2020. What's more, as digital transformations continue and the traditional verticals, for example, civil infrastructure, shift from air gap to connected, we're going to continue to see an increase in attacks, not just against the traditional digital networks, but also on OT infrastructure from supply chains to healthcare and the facilities beyond. I think the adversaries aren't constrained by, many of the constraints that we have in industry, right? They don't have to demonstrate ROIs. They don't have to write business cases. They're free to do what they want in a very agile way. They can learn from their mistakes. They can, pivot almost on the spot and, change their direction entirely almost overnight. And I think that is very much going to keep, not just organizations on their toes, but also, the security vendors such as Skybox to ensure that we continue to provide, our customers and businesses with the level of protection that they deserve.
Thanks again to Alastair Williams for joining us today. To learn more about the company and what they do, you can go to skyboxsecurity.com. Thanks for joining us today, and I'd encourage you to check out previous episodes of Security Breach, where we looked at a variety of other industrial cybersecurity concerns. I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.